Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's great pleasure for me to introduce and speaker today who is going to talk to us about the software quality assurance and who would some choose it as a career. Our speaker is currently employed by him as an engineering manager for the software quality assurance. He has worked for 32 years in the biometric and semiconductor industry. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Paul.
Yes, as Tamul told us, we have Mr. Paul here, all the way from Beaverton, Oregon. State. That's far away, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. How do you feel being in Pakistan and TEO?
I'm enjoying it very much. I enjoy being here. I enjoy the culture. I'm enjoying the food, lots of food, and I'm enjoying being able to get to know some of the team here that are working on Blitzen. You know, a very capable group. Look forward to good things from TEO as we continue to develop these products that our customers really want to have. So excited to be part of that.
Thank you very much, Paul. So, being here, if you should feel inside yourself, do you have a happy heart right now?
Yes, absolutely.
That sounds great. So, it says that you have, I'm told that you have around 14 years of experience in R&D and test. And you couldn't just stop there. You continue for another 30 years with quality assurance.
That's true.
How do one do that?
Good question. If you hear of field inversion gel electrophoresis controllers, I was the designer for those kind of tools in the R&D area. But I ended up, after working for Boeing and putting all sorts of strain gauges and other transducers on airplanes to see how they performed, I went ahead and found a job with a gentleman who used to work at Xerox. He became my mentor. He was actually there for the first Xerox machines that were made when you made copies of things. And so he mentored me in software quality assurance, and I decided that I really kind of liked the experience. And so he kind of kept me going for 30 some odd years. The excitement behind, I'll get that in the presentation, but the excitement of some of the customers when we got a job done right is like no other feeling.
So it's basically the ownership of a solid product that keeps you going.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Paul, we are obliged to have you along with us today.
Okay, so I was asked a little bit about what software quality assurance is. Gupal and I had a lively discussion earlier last week, and so hence this presentation. I was also asked, why would somebody consider a career in software quality assurance? So I'm going to attempt to address those today. So what is software quality? I want to start with that, just to kind of get us on the same page. Here are some definitions. I know it when I see it. Not a particularly good definition, not very helpful to engineering or SQA, but I've heard it. I've also heard software that doesn't have any bugs. I don't know if you're familiar with the term nada, but there was somebody who, as a joke, put up a piece of software that he called nada. Nada means nothing. Okay. And this was from his website. Unfortunately, his website's gone, but this was basically the material. So here's a piece of software that is 100% bug-free. It does absolutely nothing. It's 8 bits in length. You can install it, and you can be confident that it will do nothing. Okay. So my point is that typically software that does something is going to have a few bugs. And we want to improve the customer experience so that the bugs that they encounter are not show-stopping for them, that they can get their work done, that they can feel confident that the software that they use is going to work for them every time, or at least most of the time. So going on with the definitions, this one begins a little more sane definition: software that complies with approved engineering specifications. The American Society for Quality, which I'm a member of, defines quality as the totality of features and characteristics of a product or service that bears on its ability to satisfy stated or implied needs. That's a lot of words, but there are more. Quality management framework defines quality as the degree to which an object, entity, for example, a process, product, or service satisfies a specific set of attributes or requirements. That's out of the Handbook of Software Quality Assurance, 4th edition. Again, a lot of words. Good thoughts and reasonable definitions. I prefer a different definition. I prefer quality equals the sum of the performance divided by the sum of the expectations. All of these fit within that, but identifying what the performance is and what the expectations are is really everybody's responsibility, from the people who manage projects to the people who service it to the customers who use it. Just understanding their expectations is really important. It's sitting there in the denominator of the equation for a reason. What might those items of quality be? I've listed them here. There's 16 software quality dimensions, and I'll touch on those a bit. I'll borrow a paradigm. I'm going to go to hardware here. So what is quality? I have up here a plastic cup. I have a stainless steel tumbler. Which one is higher quality?
Both
Anyone can have a better
different,
quality.
you know,
It is made right.
Right. It depends on the use case, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Expectations.
If the expectations of the customer, am I going to spend 20 cents a cup or $20 a tumbler? If I have a large party, the $20 tumbler may have much less quality than the paper cup. So expectations are really important, and we need to understand, what is the customer doing? Does he need paper cups? Does he need a stainless steel tumbler? So who has responsibility for software? Everyone in this room, everyone that is involved with the customer. That's the software developer, that's the QA person, that's the stakeholders. You know, is stakeholders a term that you use here?
Yes.
Okay. Program and project managers, engineering and SQA. All of us have a responsibility for quality. Here, poor Dilbert is busy trying to give some feedback to the person who's specifying the requirements, and he's specified too many, and Dilbert says, the guy gets it and he says, well, then we'll just make it more user-friendly. We'll add easy to use to the list. Kind of missed the point. So, but it's important that we bring these things up. So, in talking about performance and expectations, these both could be pointing to that same quality metric. So, we'll look at quality in terms of, is it correct? Does the customer think it's correct? Do you think it's correct? What's the performance like for that? And what are the expectations have been set? Same thing for functionality. Kind of goes without saying. Completeness. Is there something left out? Accuracy. Does it give the proper solution? Robustness. Can it recover from an unexpected event? Usability. The ease of use for the end user. I mean, that goes without saying. I have another slide on that one. Adaptability. The ability of the customers to be able to mold their experience as needed. If you're in Word or some other thing, you notice that often you give you the opportunity to make shortcuts, other things like that. It's adaptable. Maintainability, again, is it easy for the customer to use? How does he interact with it? How does he get his data in and out? What does he do? How can he maintain the software? Maintainability does not. You don't want a memory leak in the middle of that. That's not maintainable. It also hits robustness. Okay, so extensibility. the ease of extending the software, it's a new functionality. That really is important. It's key for developers. As you set things up, it's highly likely with some good software, its functionality may need to be extended in the future. So the ease of extending software or the new functionality, and right on the heels of it is modifiability. Different sides of the coin, but roughly the same coin. So I sometimes refer to this as change-ready software. Performance, the software performs in a manner consistent with the user's expectations. It's scalable. That is, it may very well be that you've got a single user, so you don't have to worry about scalability. That goes away. That's the expectation. The expectation might be that you have a number of users that are trying to use this. Is it scalable? Can you install it easily? Is the software maintain its data well and not it doesn't get corrupted? And then is it portable? Can I run it on multiple platforms? Again, you may not. Maybe it's a Windows 10 platform. Maybe it's some other platform. But if you have to support multiple, it's a good question to ask. And then lastly, security. Is the customer's data protected? If he's putting in data into your software, is he protected from somebody else coming into it? So those are the 16 areas. If you look this up, you'll find lots of different things. You'll find 8, you'll find 12, you'll find 16, you'll find 24. These are the ones I go with. And they're all good to a degree. So you may find other items that you might want to say, but performance really includes all of these. And really, the expectations are there too. So let's talk about a few expectations. If you're working on a replacement or an update piece of software or firmware, it's important to consider that the customer cares most about keeping things that used to work. If I was learning how to ride a bicycle, and I've got that down now, and then as a paradigm for software, now somebody throws in addition to riding a bicycle, we'd also like you to juggle. Okay. Somebody has the right idea, this would be a great thing for people to do. It's likely you're not going to be as successful. I assume that they might get away with riding a bicycle, but juggling and riding a bicycle, again, is going to be a tough combination. And you may want to reconsider the requirements for that, but not a success, formula for success.
It's probably the sales that come up with that idea, isn't it?
The
sales.
Yeah, well, I don't know, could be sales, could be marketing, could be anybody. Port Dilbert, we need to align our priorities with customers, and above all else, do no harm to what they have today. And Port Dilbert, unfortunately, didn't have that experience in this cartoon here. Here's a user interface. This is from a vintage submarine from years ago. So a bad user interface is like a joke. If you have to explain it, it's not that good. So if you're in the middle of the UI, don't do that. Going back again, just to repeat, user interface. When you're looking at expectations, this is not the user interface that you want to have. If a user interface is like a joke, if you have to explain it, it's not that good. This is taken from an old vintage World War II submarine, and my hat's off to those guys who knew that operate, because that's mind-boggling. So, what is software quality assurance? I like this definition. It consists of the means to ensure quality of the released software by monitoring the software engineering methods and processes. That's not quite test. It's close. The test will only be part of that. SQA spans across the entire software development lifecycle. It includes the requirements management, and software management. So they're linked. You see this symbol here on the side, this yin yang. I've adopted it for what we do here, and that quality assurance, the side that we sometimes fail to implement is the prevention side. We spend a lot of time on the detection and testing, and that's very good. And it may very well be that is the major amount of time, but I would recommend that at least a third, ordering to a half, is spent, QA's time is spent in quality assurance, the prevention side. So some of the tools used by SQA, we talk about verification and validation, we use those. And within this is also the prevention side of things. You'll see, I've highlighted testing in there, but you can see where validation and verification kind of match, they overlap. And in testing, different groups will do it different ways. I had a group that this is the way we did it. It's not, I'm not saying this is the way Viant did it, I'm just saying it is a way. So but testing is what those guys are in the middle. Notice that there's a lot of stuff sitting outside of that. The style checkers, the static analysis, the proof of correctness. Sometimes people get confused about verification and validation. If I was, again, to take a different analogy to it, if I was painting a wall, I might say, did I paint the wall? Are there any streaks in the wall? Did the paint stay on? All of the different qualities of my putting the paint on the wall. Validation would say, did I paint the right wall? So that's why you can see over here, usability testing, both performed by QA as well as apps engineering, because we're trying to get the customer's experience. I have in here code inspection versus code review. Has anybody ever worked with a code inspection as opposed to a code review? Do you know the difference?
We are reviewing the code.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in a code review, you're reviewing the code, and in that sense, and QA should be involved. You're reviewing the code. You're looking at it for conformance to the code requirements, code standards, other things like that, so that it can be maintained. It'll be maintainable as time goes on. The other one, code inspection, is where you simply look at the software for bugs. Are there any bugs here? And it's interesting. There's a gentleman by the name of Gil. He's out of Scandinavian country. I can't remember which one. And he has a book that he talks about that. I'll have to admit, I haven't been as successful in implementing that in groups. Sometimes it's a little more difficult. They're like code reviews in that sense. But highly recommended. Trying to do things ahead of the software, of bugs being put into the software. So we've talked about my work experience. Just a quick note. There's the 14 years where I was a test tech, literally on a bench for about 3 years, and then went to Greg University and worked there in the instrumentation lab. We served the College of Life Sciences as well as the Department of Life, the College of Life Sciences and the Department of Chemistry, and made a number of devices for the graduate students. And then Boeing and a flight test instrumentation engineer. But the rest of the time has been in QA. I've worked as a QA lead, as a manager, and then they put me into engineering management. I enjoyed that, but I really liked software quality assurance. And Generac for 3 years. It's a pick and place. It's a company that puts chips on circuit boards prior to them as they go through, and then solders them to the circuit boards and so forth. We had to program multiple machines. At PrintTrack, it was automatic fingerprint identification systems. At Cascade, these are semiconductor probe stations that I worked with for about 22 years, and went back and forth. Was a manager. Went back and it started out in SQA when I was a manager, then for QA, and then I kept getting asked to jump into engineering management, and I would tell them, it's the fox guarding the hen house, having me both have SQA and software development responsibilities. That's really not where you want to be, but that's where we were. So 7 years I did that, but I managed to get them to hire a new manager and a new project manager, because I was doing both at the time. So so I was able to play with in SQA. The draw for me in SQA is that I feel that I can make more of a change, that I can add more to the conversation. I have developed software for fingerprints and biometric systems and so forth, but that was a long time ago. But I do appreciate the efforts that people are making in this process. Okay. So Why a career in SQA? SQA is part of the software development team. Sometimes we consider it separate. It's not. It's an important part. Sometimes we talk about software quality assurance as being hardening the software. That's an important part to do. Again, we want to meet the customer's expectations and hopefully exceed them. In that equation, we saw the sum of the performance divided by the sum of the expectations. Now, if you're going to be really, going to be concerned about the bottom line and so forth, what you want that equation to be is 1. You want the quality to be 1. You want the expectations to match the performance. If you want to then push it up a little bit, something higher than 1 would be great for the customer. It may not be great for the customer, the company, because you might be spending too much time and they want you to do other things. But at least 1 or above is what you want to do. Surprise and delight your customer. A company by the name of Sun used to create amplifiers, worked at a higher quality level than just 1. And you always knew if you got a Sun amplifier, it was going to amaze you. It was going to be at least a few percentage, 10%, 20%, 30% better than the specs.
Paul, from your own perspective, right? Once you have the performance and the expectation part, how do you weigh them? The different artifacts within the two parts. How would you weigh them when you work with it?
Well, what you do is you look at it and you say, okay, what's important to the customer? This is a single application. It's a single user. I don't have to worry about supporting 20 users. So that is not it's not necessarily part of the equation. But other things are, and you take a look at that and you order rank them and decide which one is the most important, and then you go down the list prioritizing them. Turns out generally a good chunk of them are important. And so you've got a lot of things to work with.
Okay. So what I'm hearing you saying is that once you receive a requirement specification, for example, then the QA's job is also to go through the requirement specification and sort it in a prioritized way. Yes,
well, there's that aspect of it, especially when we're doing our test planning and so forth. But there's the other side of it where I'm going to be looking for specific words in the requirements document. If I see a word that ends in IZE, maximize, what does that mean? I don't know, make it bigger? Yeah. Bigger than what? If I see words like, I see words ending in LY in a requirements document, SQA should be challenging that. The developer should be challenging that. You should know what it is they're asking you to do. And if you don't, work hard to get that definition. And if you can't, then commit them to give you that definition at a future date that's acceptable.
So what you actually are saying is that go through the requirement specification and then catch those words which are vague or can have a double meaning.
Yes.
And get them cleared out and get them unified and corrected and then go on.
So I've given to Samara and ITSOC a couple of documents that are meant for QA and it could be for anybody. But basically 12 points in that document says, here are the 12 things to look for. Make sure you've got a good requirement and to push back and challenge you when you're reading a document. Same thing for a functional specification.
And what about this thing about that, when Samara comes and say, okay, there's too many LY words, there's too many maximize and utilize and emphasize on it, we need to talk to the customer about it. And I'm from the sales, I'd say, no, don't let us bother the customer, let's find out along the way. What would your recommendation be in such a case?
Well, I would advise Samara to emphasize to you that in order to be successful, that we're going to need to know this information, and however you get it, you have wonderful talents in working with customers, and I'm sure that you'll be able to fish out that needed information. I think it's in the customer's best interest. They'll want to have something that performs well, and if they're not sure, then recommend, and then get them to agree with that recommendation. That way, their expectation has been set. We played with that bottom part of the equation.
Exactly. So what we are actually doing there is to setting the bottom part of the equation, so that the expectations are 100% clear.
Yes.
For everyone.
For everyone.
And that should be done as soon as possible.
As soon as possible. It just get right up front, and things will come up. Changes will be made. Hopefully, not too many. But you'll want to clarify as quickly as you can. The developers need time. The developers do a great job developing software, but they'll do an even better job if they know what it is they're supposed to develop. So, okay, so let's see, back up. So there's a real need for competent SQA around the world. It's nice to have a job that's in demand. SQA has the opportunity to work with the entire product and its application. Typically, not always, but most of the time, we're looking at the entire product. I enjoy that part. You can come up with creative ways to do some testing, and that can be a lot of fun. I got the developers really mad at me one time when I was having a bug that kept showing up, and it would show up at random times. 10 minutes, 30 days, had no idea. And then, so I went ahead and developed an automation that just simply took the program up and then turned off, took the program up and turned off. And the developers said, well, nobody's going to use it that way. But within an hour, I could repeat that problem within an hour by doing that. And so QA will do things like that because they've seen something and they're trying to find a way to recreate it. So yes, we want to test the way the customer uses it, but if we want to find a bug, you'll find us digging deeper.
What that term is called?
Pardon?
What that term is called, for example, if you are testing, on and off, what it is called? Monkey testing?
Monkey testing? I've never heard of that before. So I was doing it automated because I didn't want to be the monkey throwing the switch on. So I like QA. I like creating ways to reduce the manual workload. A lot of times we have, like anybody else, I'm not crazy about doing the same thing over and over and over again. And so where I can, when it comes to regression testing, automating it is a great thing. I find myself constantly learning. Been learning this week and last week. Very much appreciate everybody's patience as I'm trying to learn too. Multiple and ever increasing aspects of the software to explore. How are you going to test and how are you going to work with and applicate AI, artificial intelligence? There's a whole new branch of software quality assurance that's dealing with that, which is kind of fun. And there are lots of other things that this is to explore. And then a couple examples, I think. Let's see, how are we doing time-wise? I guess we're okay. When I worked at Genrad, the first day that I worked, my first day of work, I walked in, and it's unusual really for me to get a call from a customer, but I did. I got 2 irate calls from customers. They were not happy campers with me, with our company in particular. I had just been there, and they made negative comments about my family. They didn't know them either, but they were really bent out of shape. And the question was, don't you ever test your software? Now, this is for pick and place machines. They're trying to get products out the door. They're trying to make these circuit boards as quickly as they can. And so I understood their frustration. So we had a really good team. I was fortunate to be there. Their pain point was quite high, and we were able to make changes. And a year and a half later is unusual. Normally in QA, you think, well, no news is good news. You take that as a compliment, and you need to. But unusually, I actually got a telephone call from, I don't know if it was the same 2 customers, but from another 2 customers, and they asked, what did you do? The software, when we installed it, it worked the first time. All our files worked the first time. What did you do differently? It was because we implemented a lot of the things that I just mentioned here. And to surprise the delight, I mean, it's a payday I still think about. At PrintTrack, I had a number of opportunities for that kind of thing. One was we were doing user acceptance tests at PrintTrack. We took the customer's database of 10 print cards and converted them into a digital format that our stations could review. Our stations could use to search latent fingerprints, seen fingerprints from crime scenes or other things like that. And so we had a gentleman from England that had come to accept a station. His database was sitting on a station, and typically they would bring in a bunch of 10 print cards with them. And they would have ones that they know should be in the database, and then they had others that they knew wouldn't be in the database. And typically they'd bring a couple of unsolved crimes. And so this very proper British gentleman in his 3-piece suit is sitting there at our station, running us through. The first thing he decided to do is take that 10 print card from an unsolved crime and throw it in. 45 seconds later, he had a hit. And the crime was 30 years old. And he was so excited. And then just 15 seconds later, the second hit came from the second car. And he stood up and he danced a jig on the factory floor. You know, that's a great feeling, you know, that you were contributing to that. The next thing he did is run over the phone and make a call to England. Because there's obviously a couple of people that need to apprehend. But again, those are the things that motivate me when it comes to SQA. So when people ask why have I been in QA so long, I reflect on those experiences. All right, just some resources to close up here. If you're interested, I have a ton of books, a wall full, over the years. These are the ones that come to mind first, that I use quite a bit. I belong to IEEE and ASQ. I'm a lifetime member of IEEE. But HCM is an organization that I belong to from time to time, their computer section. There's ISTQB and IIST, they're certification organizations. And the nice thing about ISTQB is they're pretty international. I mean, literally, most of the publications are in multiple languages. Steve O'Connell's books, I highly recommend them for software developers and QA people. They give us an idea of some good techniques, again, that prevention side of things. And the one that I really enjoy is this guy by Linda Westfall, Certified Quality Engineer Handbook. I find it very accessible. You don't have to read it from cover to cover, but if you want to know something about a particular topic, it's there. It's plain, it's straightforward. I enjoy the book very much. And then the ISTQ books, particularly by Rex Black, Foundations of Software Testing, and the Testing Metrics, Measuring Product, Process, and Quality. Those are good books, and I highly recommend those as well. And I haven't mentioned there's a number of other authors, Carl Wiegers, and I could go on the list, but these are the ones that are kind of the main ones. Key. All right, and so in typical Blitzen, I'm done. All right. Okay, so I'm good for questions.
Yeah. Paul,
Yes.
you have a lot of questions in software quality assurance, right? And you are the right guy to ask this question. You have worked on a project when project was developed using waterfall model, and you are also working on projects when projects are being developed in agility or in DevOps paradigm. Do you see any difference between the nature and way of work of software quality assurance resource when they are working on these two different project paradigm, development paradigm?
So there are differences, and my experience has been mostly with waterfall or spiral, and sometimes iterative. At BIAMP, we're kind of using this hybrid iterative model, where the specifications are set forward, and then the development is done in sprints, as opposed to a full-on business development in sprint. Yeah, there are differences. I like the idea of being focused in a sprint, but a sprint could also be thought of as a bunch of little waterfalls. So I think from a QA standpoint, not as big a difference, but there are some.
I have one question. In SDLC, it is the way that you have to clear all the requirements before you start development. But in agility, as told by you, and as we know that there are two phases, that there are the prevention and detection. So in prevention, it is required that it is the core responsibility of the quality assurance to review the information and to see for the missing information and ambiguous as well. But if there are a piece of information that is ambiguous, but no one in the team, even all the stakeholders don't know that how can we deal with this information. So what is decided based on our initial understanding, it is suggested that you develop a model and then we will review it. After the development, the complaint is made that we are not expecting this piece of module from you guys, then how can we deal with it? Because in agility, you don't have enough time to do enough R&D for that piece of information. You have to present something to the customer, and then you have to get that review from that on that model. So how can we handle it?
Okay, so let me make sure I've got it right here. So you're saying that sometimes because the sprints are so short, you really don't have enough time to prepare for it. Is that right, from a QA standpoint? That's a problem. And I think that's why BIAMP has gone to the iterative model. So basically, all of the establishment requirements and functional specifications are done at the beginning, and then when development starts, so they're already laid out, so you don't have that problem. And then the development is done in sprints. And I think the industry seems to be heading that way, actually. At least I see more of it now, and I've seen people recommend it. So this hybrid iterative sprint model. How are you going to do it in a full-on sprint? You're going to have to allow or insist on the time in that sprint. You're going to have to make it an item that you check off, saying, this is it. And typically, QA from a test standpoint sometimes is lagging a bit because the product comes and then we do a test, and while development's on that sprint, we're doing tests on the previous sprint. Not always. We try to do it as close as we can because the whole idea is to get feedback immediately. Planning, we have to do ahead, either in that sprint or as much information as we have before the sprint, we would then do that and do our planning. But it's up to us then to set the expectations. That quality formula fits us too. We've got to provide the expectations and tell people, I don't have time to do this. And you need to have a frank discussion with the project manager and say, okay, well, how can I get that time in there? Where can we fit it in the sprint? Does that answer your question?
To get the information before we start
Yeah.
sprint.
Sometimes you don't always have that luxury, though. Yes, sir.
For your presentation. I'm quite interested in automating the testing. So, have you ever automated the test cases for a product that involves both hardware and software?
Yes, although if you're talking about Blitzen, it's a little different because you got the firmware there. So I tend to approach it like a black box.
Right.
I don't know what's inside, but I know what the behavior is supposed to be and what the user experience is supposed to be. And so when I automate, then I'll automate those things that are highly repeatable. If I've got something brand new, I'm not going to automate something that's brand new. It's going to have to be done manual test-wise because the test automation takes about 3 to 4 times longer than an actual manual test. However, for a regression test, it really becomes important
Yes.
because it will save you tons of time.
But if any hardware is involved, can we do that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just that now you have the additional complexity of having the hardware and the firmware make sure that they're lined up, that you have the right set of firmware or the right set of hardware.
Thank you very much, first of all, for your session. It was very insightful. Initially in your presentation, you have mentioned that when some software is working, then we should expect some bugs. But then you have not mentioned how many bugs we should expect. So if Mr. X is developing something, he is creating 5 bugs probably after the release. And Mr. Y is doing some coding and he's delivering like 100 bugs at the end. So how would we maintain a balance and draw a line? Now, this is the accountability part. We have to go back to the developer and talk to him why these many bugs you are producing in every release and all. So that balance, I would like to know, how can we do that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So again, I would encourage you to rely on some prevention tools. I would look at cyclomatic complexity prior to the software being sent over to QA and see how high it is. Typically something with a really big UI content is going to have a high cyclomatic complexity. And developers can get real creative about lowering it by mixing up statements. But assuming everything stays status quo with their coding, then that approach would work to help. I mean, it'll show the more complicated areas. As far as bugs are concerned, you've got somebody who's producing a lot of bugs and somebody who's producing less. There are 2 things you need to consider. One, what's the complexity of the software that he's creating? If I'm just simply providing commands to a database and I have any other user feedback, it's just simply let's trade data. That's tons easier than if I've got a UI and I have to interact and I have to do it in a certain period of time. And so the UI guy might be given a break because there might be some bugs that showed up that were just beyond him. However, take the complexity into account for the developers. And then past that point, if you've got somebody who's just producing a lot, then invest the time. I mean, if you've got a good person, they can be educated. And so, and good people are precious. So, invest in them and help them to reduce the number of bugs they're making, all things being equal.
I just want to know what's the definition of a good QA source. With the advancement in the techniques we have for the development, keeping the hope with that being the SQA, and secondly, how to deal with the bug leakage and the expectation part. If you just go with 2 to 3 bugs in the production, does it make you a bad QA? Or if it doesn't make you the bad QA, like how to deal that pressure and how to come out of that zone that you did your best, but it's normal to have a bug in the production as well, and it's a cycle. You can never deliver bug-free or 100% best performing software. It's a cycle. So like how to deal with that pressure and what's the definition of a good QA?
Now you're talking about good QA from the standpoint of the process, you're talking about good QA from the standpoint of a person.
As a process,
As a process.
value adding the resource of the QA.
So good QA is going to find, it is going to be looking for, in the documentation, for unambiguous statements, requirements that don't conflict. Often you'll see a requirements document, a requirement here, and then there's another one down at the bottom that either is in conflict or modifies it. A good QA person is going to bring that to people's attention, because the developers are going to end up with two different things that are opposing each other that will cause a bug just on its own. So a good QA person is going to spend time looking through that, working with the developers, and really nail down those requirements. So a good QA person is going to, let's see, that's a person, we're talking about process. So they'll adhere to techniques that help them to do the prevention and the detection side. And there's a ton of those. They'll become familiar with the tools that support all of that. And there's a ton there. You had a second question though.
Like if there is a bug leakage,
Yeah.
how to deal with that pressure and make other stakeholders to understand that it's a process. You never go right at once.
Yeah.
How to deal with that?
Well, the space shuttle, you know, I'm not talking about the engines now that blew up, but the space shuttle itself, it flew with 3 computers working with each other that they had bugs. And NASA didn't dare change a single bug there that they knew about because they were afraid that they would create others. So it is part of a natural process. So the question is, what's the pain point of that bug? Is it going to cause the customer to totally lose his data, or he's going to lose hours worth of work? That's too high a pain point. So I think being able to express that to developers, what the pain point is going to be, is a big help, and to your project manager, what it's going to be. And in terms of bugs, for QA, the more the merrier. So we want to find as many as we can, because we want to beat the customer from finding them. We don't want to be hearing back from the customer about the bugs they're finding. No news is good news.
In software development, there are multiple, stakeholders. For example, developer is developing something, project manager is managing project, QA is responsible of quality, and infrastructure guy, they are responsible of infrastructure. Sometimes, there are some expectation that, QA should know how to have the SQL query to verify the data. He should know something about the programming as well, so that he can verify the software. At the same time, he should also know that how to deploy things on the production environment. What is the red line? What we expect from the QA? If he knows these two things, should we put deployment responsibility on the QA? Should QA accept these kind of things, or he should say, no, this is not our responsibility? You should have dedicated people for that.
So if I understand your question correctly, should SQA be fixing bugs or developing software. The only,
Fixing bugs, developing software, and deploying things on production.
okay. So when we talk about production, are we talking about sending it out to the customer, or are we saying before it gets to the customer?
Yes, yeah.
Before it gets to the customer, okay. So, yeah, no, QA shouldn't be writing software. I mean, it's the whole idea, the whole reason we separate them. QA should write software to test or to facilitate their testing, but they shouldn't be writing the actual application. But they should have knowledge of how to do it. One of the things that we would do from a QA standpoint is if you've got some good programming knowledge, and I've had good programmers on my QA staff, we'll go through and we'll take a look at the code when we see an issue, and for regression testing, we'll say, oh, it's in this part of the code. What else, now that it's been fixed, what else could have been affected by that? We'll go evaluate the code and do that. You can't always do that. And in lieu of that, you can go to the software developer and have a conversation in the code that you fixed. What else could have gone wrong that I should look at? And then I encourage the QA people to think about that and see if there's something else that they might need to do as well. That shouldn't take too long, but something should be done.
Yeah, I have one question for you. From your vast experience with QA and being a part of a software development team and environment, we have both developers here, we have QA, and we have different stakeholders. Often it comes to clashes about that. Why did you find that bug? Could we just release it, right? Just forget it. Get it under the carpet, right? Please, I'll give you a cup of tea afterwards. Right? But how can we? Do you have some recommendations about how can this more the social profile and the socialization part become better between development and SQA, so that when shit hit the fan, it actually don't. Do you follow what I'm trying to ask you about?
I think so.
Yeah.
I'll go back to software quality is everybody's business.
Yeah.
And so if a developer finds a bug, the developer got some good experiences with developers here, that they should report that bug. We want to find the bugs. Not knowing about the bugs, hiding our head in the sand, so to speak, isn't going to help understand what the software is out. As a management team, you're going to want to know that we're sending out quality software, or hey, this software is going to need some hand-holding. You're going to need to smooth things out with the customers if you decide to release it against the recommendations of the QA group.
Yeah.
On the other hand, QA is not perfect. Sometimes people think we are. We're not. Please don't put that on us. So we're going to miss a few things. Typically, about 10% of the bugs that we report, you can, in industry-wise, standard-wise, you're going to find 10% of the bugs we found. If we found 100, 10 of them are going to make it out to the field. So you want to prepare for that and take a look at where QA found the bugs and say, okay, I'm going to need, for anybody who's supporting this, I'm going to need to have people really make sure they're really sharp on this particular feature. Hopefully it's a brand new feature, not an existing one, because that's a pain point that customers typically can't accept.
I'm going to come a bit back to my question again,
Okay.
and that's more because now you have the SQA background, right? As you said, SQA is a responsibility for everyone, and we have many developers here as well. What is the minimum SQA responsibility for a developer, do you think?
Well, okay, so, and I'm talking about software quality as opposed to SQA, but software
Yeah,
quality.
software quality then.
So the minimum would be, I've written the code, don't throw it over the wall, do some unit testing. If it requires some integration, do some integration with it. If you want help from QA on the integration, QA would be real happy to jump in with it because it's going to give us an opportunity to look at it and say, oh, test case here, maybe we can develop. But this should be an integration testing is where the two of us should really work together closely. But unit testing at a minimum should be done by the developers.
Shafat has a question.
Yes, Shafat.
Yes, Shafat.
Thank you very much for the detailed session and giving me the opportunity to ask the question. My question is actually if you can, sir, please explain from your experience or give some tips regarding the communication with the developer. Suppose we have a lot of bugs in the software. So as a tester, with what mindset we should communicate the bug or report the bug with the developers, as no one wants to have a bug in his code or software. So if you can share your experience or give some tips.
Sure. So you'll want to do two things. Developers do a wonderful job developing software. They work really hard to do it, and I know getting a little bit of cricket. Sometimes, please don't think of a bug as criticism. Think of it as an opportunity. You can change your mindset that way. It'll go a long ways towards helping you in that area. From a QA standpoint, always respect to each other and to the software developers. Always respect them. I'll have to say, I did have in one of my experiences. I had a SQA person who would, in a lot of his bug reports, he would say, "What third grade idiot wrote this piece of garbage software?" And I pulled him into my office several times to say, "Look, we just don't do this." He says, "Well, in my country, if we don't say something like that, we don't get attention." And I said, "Well, you're not in your country, you're here." Because that's just not respectful. It's not helpful. And the problem is, he actually put in some pretty good problem reports, but said, "Oh, it's from him. You know, I'm not even going to pay attention to that." So it wasn't helpful. So always respect. Respect the fact that everybody is trying to do the best job they know how. And don't worry about SQA reporting bugs. It's not a reflection on you. It's a reflection on the complexity of the system that we have right now. That's improving, but it's pretty slow at this point. So we can expect that we'll continue to have that. So for a developer, just know, don't take the bug as a personal affront. It's not.
Okay. Thank you very much for a great session. So my question is, what are the challenges you had faced during QA role and how you resolved these challenges?
Well, we've talked about a few of them. The gentleman that I mentioned that was writing these problem reports, I finally put him on a process improvement program, and he kindly left the company. So I didn't have to deal with it anymore. In terms of, jump back, so how did I deal with them? I always deal with them with respect. That's all I can say on that. It's just, again, people make the best effort. We all have the right intentions, and I can go a long ways with intentions.
Does that answer your question?
I'm not sure.
Okay, go ahead and answer.
So he was
answer the
actually,
question again.
he was asking about the biggest challenge you have faced
Oh,
in SQA and how did you deal with it? This is what he's trying to ask.
Yeah, the biggest challenge, I've gone into a couple of companies and they just didn't have any QA. It wasn't there. So the biggest challenge I had was bringing the QA group up and then getting the developers to accept the QA feedback. And the way I did that is just, again, acknowledging the fact that it's a difficult job, and then get everybody on board. Stop. If I've got QA people that are criticizing developers, stop that right now. There's no room for that. So that was my biggest challenge on those two occasions where customers were not happy, and we did a lot of education with the QA group as well as the development group in order to improve that situation. That's how we handled it.
And I promise this is going to be the last one from my side. I have been doing QA myself too in past, but the biggest challenge that I have faced was the estimations part.
Yes.
For SQA and for testers, it's not pretty straightforward to actually give estimations on some release that when I'm going to deliver that release after my testing. So for developers, probably it's very easy to give estimation for some modules because they could clearly see what we have to do in database, front end, back end, all API. But for testers, if we really have to estimate based on the test points that we have written, it would be straightforward testing, and we don't tend to find out the corner cases. So I personally believe that if we are given more time and the freedom, we can be more creative finding out the corner cases that nobody can see, only the end users will see. So this estimation part, how is that happening right now in your experience?
So one of the books I recommended was Steve McConnell's book, Software Estimation. I'd refer you to that. A lot of good information in there. I always reserve time for bugs. And in my previous industry, I had a historical record of what it took. So I knew if we were doing a project that involved 200 man days of work by the developers, then I knew QA was going to take essentially a third of that,
Okay.
to about a third of that time. And that included our ability to write the test documentation, as well as do the testing, as well as deal with this defects. I want to call them software change requests. That's the industry I came from. But so we reserve time, and sometimes we were able to bring the schedule in a bit, and other times expand it out a little bit. But overall, we had about a 90 to 95% success rate with that.
Great.
So get this. If you're not collecting historical information, start collecting historical information. Get a good idea. How many man hours did we put in this? What did QA do? And then use that, and then just continue to refine it and modify it as you go along, and you'll come pretty close.
Yeah. What we are doing is that we are allocating probably 20% of the development time to QA, but I always see that it's always more than that. It's not 20% at all. In few cases, it could take like 40-50%. But we really have to update our books. I mean, it has to be at least 30% or more than that.
It really depends on. I mean, if you were at Sun years ago, it was 1-to-1. But for this industry, 3. Some people will go 4-to-1. That's a little light. 3-to-1 is a much better. 33% of the development time. You should expect 33% SQA time.
21 minutes overdue. So thank you very much, Paul.
Yes, thank you, Paul, for the great presentation and giving us the time from your busy schedule. So, in last, I will request the Gibran to give the small gift to Mr. Paul.
Can we expect more in coming times online?
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Remember that.